What is going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the ABJ Podcast, episode 84, with the president himself, Phil Stamper. He'll be joining us here momentarily. Very excited for this one. His name has come up so much on this podcast, of so many people's journeys of how they got into this business and all they've accomplished. And Phil has been a huge part of a lot of people's journey in this industry, helping them along the way and just dedicating his time into making sure this craft continues on and is on the right path. So love this dude to death, and I'm super excited to have a conversation with him. But before we get into any of that, make sure you check the links below for all things ABJ, as well as my guest, so you can support them in all their ventures that we'll talk about here in a moment. Merchandise available now. So if you go grab some t-shirts, there's Patreon. So once again, if you want to check out these interviews early, you can subscribe to the Patreon as little as $1, and you get the episode Monday before it drops on Thursday. Also, you get to see the Discord links below. If you join the Discord, all these episodes, when they record, spoiler alert, these have been recorded all early and have been released throughout the time because of the new job, the new life situation. So that will be a thing. So if you want to see episodes as they go live, join the Discord, because that's the best way to get your questions in, and then also watch the stream live and a live chat in the Discord while it's all going down. So there's definitely perks, even though the show's not live currently on YouTube all the time anymore, but there are ways to join and communicate and participate, and that there's your ways to go about doing it. So also thank you to our huge sponsor and the ones keeping the lights on, Suplex Vintage Wrestling. Guys, it has finally happened. A whole store fully dedicated to vintage wrestling, and they said it can never be done, but I have seen it with my own eyes. Vintage Suplex Wrestling is a store curated by wrestling fans for wrestling fans, located on 5th Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just one block south of South Street in the heart of Queen Village. Their shop features the largest collection of vintage wrestling apparel under one roof. Their selection includes classic designs from your favorite wrestlers from the Golden Age, Attitude Era, Internationals, Indies, and more. And if you're tired of watching premium live events at home, then SVW hosts the best watch parties since your friend Kyle's birthday party when you were 12. And if shirts and watch parties are not your thing, then let's not forget their selection of figures, replica belts, trading cards, and from their t-shirts and hats to rare wrestling memorabilia, they have something for every wrestling enthusiast out there. So what are you waiting for? Check them out at suplex.svw on Instagram or at suplex.svw.com and let them satisfy your pro wrestling nostalgia needs. All right, well, let's jump into this one here. Without further ado, let me bring in my guest, Phil Stamper. What's going on, bud?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm super happy this is finally happening. This is something that's been in the works for a while. We've kicked it around, but you're a busy man. You're all over the place. You're grinding. You're keeping you're the backbone, essentially, what I would say, of the Northeast wrestling scene. And you would probably take on more if given the opportunity. You would try to take over the world if this industry, because I would say, without speaking for you, your love and passion for this business is probably better than anyone else I've ever met in this. And you want to make sure it's in the right hands and the right way going forward. And you're truly an inspiration to people that are in this industry.
Well, thank you. Things are weird because more recently, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from people who were like, hey, you helped me here, or like, I know you because of this reason, and my brain isn't perceiving that yet. It's this really weird transition in time for me, because like I remember like the first time somebody seriously came up to me and was like, can you give me feedback on my match? And now it's gotten to this whole other level, and I'm just not there yet in my brain with how to like rectify that.
Yeah. Because I forget who it was, because I have so many conversations and I meet so many people that everything kind of blends in. But somebody told me a story, like they started and they were way up in the north, and they're like, yeah, and I think I went to a thing and I've met Phil, and he kind of helped me very early on. I was like, he was way up there too. Like, yeah, we had a backyard show and Phil showed up and like helped trained us so we didn't die. Like, your name has brought up so many times, and every single time it was because you noticed that there was a need for people, whether it be their training was off or they could have possibly hurt themselves, or maybe they needed a bump in the right direction, how to get their training started, or just to be seen in this business. And you selflessly go out there and make sure those jobs get done, once again, because of your passion for this industry and this art.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've always raised with that lesson of don't leave a place worse than you found it. Like, make it better than you found it. That's always been in my brain. And for me, it's, why am I not putting my best foot forward? Why am I not trying to do more than just me showing up? Um, I get bored. Yeah, honestly, it makes me feel very bored when I'm just sitting there like, okay, I'm waiting for my match. Like, what else? Can I do something to help? Like,
Yeah.
that's just part of me.
Yeah. So when did you fall in love with the business of professional wrestling?
I mean, I was a kid watching wrestling. I was a kid who wrote to the WCW and WWE in like middle school to be like, "Hey, why can't kids wrestle?" I was that guy. I got a letter back from him from WCW. Just
You still have it?
I know I have it somewhere. They wrote me back twice. It was like the same response, but 2 times. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And it was weird because I think like the first and second paragraphs were like flipped in the letters. But the last paragraph was, and you can learn more about how to go get training by buying our book at I never bought the book. I wish I had bought the book.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was a kid and I just loved it, fell in love with it. I knew at a super young age that you had to get trained to go do it. And the weird path I kind of took when I got into wrestling was I didn't start by doing in-ring training. I started by working in the back. Because at that time in the ridiculously super hype of pro wrestling, all the training schools were very expensive to go to. And I had a decision to make of going to college or going to training. And I was like, well, what happens if I get hurt? Let me get my education and I can go do wrestling down the road. And but I can start working behind the scenes so I can start learning the business. I can start learning the culture. Because I really also didn't know if the culture was the place I wanted to be. I mean, as a kid was like the different drug scandals involving wrestling. And I was really cognizant of the impact that addiction has had on my family and the impact it had on me. And so I didn't want to jump into a situation where I'm like, oh, I'm going to be around all these people and a whole other level of craziness. And just so I started working backstage for a company in Virginia called the Independent Pro Wrestling Federation that was ran by Cue Ball Carmichael, and a different wrestling federation that was ran in State College, Pennsylvania, and just started to learn the ropes of what it was to be in the business. Because I wanted to. I was so in love with it. It was like, I want to then go do it. I felt like I couldn't just sit by and just be that guy just sitting there watching. I wanted to participate.
Yeah. So what roles would you take on backstage, or things would you do on that early stages to help the show go forward, or the production or anything like that?
I mean, and that's just it. It was really anything. It was like ring crew, music, security. I know I even got beat up on a match because by that point I had already done wrestling while I was in high school. I had done judo, so it was sort of, hey, you know how to at least like get hit.
Yeah.
I was not ready for it. But I trusted them and they trusted me. And so I got to learn some things even before I got my formal in-ring training, just by the association of being around.
Mm-hmm. I always tell people, even if there's, if maybe you're not interested in the in-ring aspect, and I just had people on just this past couple episodes that started off as camera people, have started off just how you're saying now. Just come. There's always something for someone to do, and there's always a job that needs to be done. And even if there's not a job that they think they need, it all hands on deck to help make a show go. And just, if you're a good person, we'll take it. Like, they'll take you. You know what I mean? And just go and help. We need graphic designers, you need cameramen, you need music, security, how you're saying. And that's a great introduction of a way to get into the business. So hearing that is pretty cool, because a lot of people just think, I wanted to be a wrestler, I started training, I wanted to be a world champion 2 weeks later. You know what I mean? So
right.
You are the definition of, getting your foot in the door and grinding your way up. So growing up, who are some of the wrestlers that you idolized or looked up to, or ones that were some of your favorites?
One of my favorites from way back was, even by this point, I mean, I was not old enough for this, but I had like ESPN Classic would show things like World Class Championship Wrestling. So here's like 80s wrestling. And Eric Embry was one of my favorites. Absolutely thought he was the most amazing thing because I could watch him and I could like understood what was happening. And his first feud, so this may tell you a little bit, for some people, it'll tell more about me a little bit. His first feud was against Skandar Akbar, who was a manager, not like a particular wrestler. It was like Skandar and his group of wrestlers. And I don't know if I could tell you offhand who some of those wrestlers were, because it was all of them against Eric Embry.
The manager.
Yeah. And so Eric was the wrestler, but Skandar was the manager. And so here's the bad guy manager with the crew of people trying to take out this one lone good guy for reasons.
Yes.
And it was just great. So Eric Embry was certainly an early favorite. And even as I started before I got involved in wrestling and was looking at it, Reckless Youth was a huge like impact and inspiration for me wanting to get into wrestling. Just I loved that in-ring style. I love the technical side that he had. And that was sort of like the guy I wanted to be when I first got into wrestling. I mean, but there were so many different influences along the way. Like Bruce the Barber Beefcake at one point, I was like, this guy is super cool. And I mean, just watching, you were like, oh, this is exciting. Like I love The Rock's promos. I loved watching Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. But then like as I started to like get into the business, then I started to become like, oh, I like this guy for this reason, or this gal for this reason. Like I can see what they're doing, and this is really cool.
Yeah. So growing up, going through school and outside of that, you said you did a little bit of judo and mat wrestling, you said, right? So was that pretty much, were you a theater kid? Did you go into performing arts? Like what crew did you fall in? Like if we were hanging out with Phil in high school, where would you have fell?
Again, that perception that other people had and like my own like outward perception, like, I had like a very small group of friends. When I started high school, I was in band, and had the passion for pro wrestling. I wasn't in wrestling or amateur wrestling yet. And so that sort of came later. And then in my junior year, I found theater. Randomly, because I was in band, we were going to do a live concert, or we were going to do orchestra pit for a musical, and it fell apart very quickly. We got something like, we got the music like 2 days before the show, and the director didn't really care to want to do it, and so they canceled us. And I went to the theater director saying, I still want to help. I'm going to do whatever I can. And so again, I started like being crew, and then I worked my way into getting on shows really quickly. And through college, I started to do more theater work, and actually got into a movie when I was in college. I think my second year in college, I got into a movie. So, and then that sort of exploded from there, because then I started, for a while, I was doing like both. I was doing like wrestling stuff and film work and theater work. And it kept me really busy while I was also in college working 2 and 3 jobs. So
the grind, your grind is unbelievable. I don't want to date you by asking this question, but how did
I've been
you come
purposefully avoiding the
I
concept
know.
of win.
It's because that's the funny thing. A lot of times that you have come up in conversations, no one can timestamp Phil. Like no one knows an age, no one knows anything of that, which makes the mysterious of Phil that much better. How did you go about finding your first school, or finding the path to do that? Because now people could just Google wrestling schools near me, or there's podcasts, or there's so many different ways where the business has been, that veil has been dropped, where it's not so much like you need to know someone to get in, or
Right.
like, you know what I mean? It's not that carny aspect as much anymore, where it's kind of like open door policy, bring your friend, and if they have something we can value, then we'll use it. How did you go about finding your first venture into the professional wrestling world?
So when for pro wrestling in general, I mean, the internet was around then. So like, I mean, that's really how I found out. There wasn't a hyper local promotion. IPWF at the time was about an hour and a half away from where I lived, and a different wrestling federation was in Pennsylvania, and I lived in Maryland, so that was like 4 hours away. So the internet certainly was the linchpin then, just to find out where places were. At that time, Q Ball Carmichaels was doing training, and he trained like Joey Matthews and Christian York. And so he would have been a great guy. I wish I had started with him, but I just didn't have the money at the time. And as I was trying to get into wrestling, and there's sort of a weird, convoluted, something else was happening in my life. It was a whole medical thing. And I was trying to find a school. And there was sort of what I thought was a timestamp of when I had to do everything by. And tried to find a couple schools in Pennsylvania. Literally none of them worked out. And that was more towards the western side of Pennsylvania. I went to one place and I like sat outside the door all day. I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. Like they literally told me, here's the time, we'll be here then. And then went to another place and the same thing happened. I think it's like 2 or 3 times on the western side of Pennsylvania that just like kept happening. I'm like, okay, then the sign is this is not the right place for me. And then had a friend that I knew through backyard wrestling, and they had gone on to get a training school. And I was like, oh, where is this at? And so I drove from my college in Frostburg, Maryland to Owings Mills, Maryland, about 2.5 hours away, one way, a few times a week to start training. And it didn't turn back. So I started training. It was called the Dominion. My initial trainer, his name was Otto Stark. By no means, I hate to say this because I don't mean to disparage him, but he was not the best trainer. But I didn't know any better at the time. Even though I had already been involved, he knew enough to sort of get by. But then I sort of realized, I don't know how long I had been there. I'm like, oh, he doesn't know. And I remember when I graduated and I had a match outside, and fortunately I was fortunate enough to wrestle a friend of mine, and I knew the match was bad. And I went to him and I'm like, I just know it's bad. What should I do? And he's like, well, you can't, I know where you're at. You can't really move away for training. There's not another training place near you. Do seminars, go to seminars and just pick up what you can and honestly find work if this is the path that you're going to take. So I started doing every seminar I could take. I mean, over the course of time, I've done seminars with Dr. Tom Pritchard and Mike Quackenbush and the SAT and Reckless Youth. Not Reckless. I said Reckless Youth. I didn't mean Reckless Youth. I meant, I was thinking I don't know why I was thinking Johnny Cashmere and Trent Acid, and I said Reckless Youth. I wish Reckless Youth was doing a seminar at the time I was getting in. And then I started working every other week for this company in West Virginia called XMCW.
Holy shit,
it
you're
sort
everywhere.
of exists still today, but like 3 owners later, and they barely run, like maybe once or twice a year now. But they used to run bi-weekly events. And so that really started to help me some because I was on the regular then at that point. And that just, that helped by getting all the other trainings and seminars I had been going to, and then getting to go there and work every other week. It was like, okay, now I'm getting it. I'm working regularly. I'm seeing it. I'm talking to, I'm learning. People are telling me more things to learn and go do. So it was so helpful to kind of do the path I did for me and how it worked out for me.
I can imagine the travel and the wear and tear on your vehicle. Holy crap. I've been in this business 2-3 years now, maybe. I don't remember. I don't know. And I'm on my first transmission blown, and I'm like, I don't know how to fix this. I have no money. I put everything into my travel and I didn't make shit. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm in my first slump, and I hear people like you who you work in 3 jobs trying to figure this out. It's just like, man, I commend that so much because it's not easy. It's not.
In a very unfortunate way, just by even where I live now, I'm not really in the middle of a population center. And early on, like when I started in wrestling, it was definitely past the territory days, but there were sort of loops that people were sticking to that so I went to college at Frostburg, Maryland. So that's in Western Maryland. So it's sort of halfway. It's like an hour from Morgantown, West Virginia. And so what I was finding was the place I would go down in West Virginia, like the West Virginia and Pittsburgh people sort of would stay here and ride up and down West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania. And the Maryland, Baltimore, Philadelphia crew would do this circle on that side of Pennsylvania and Maryland, but they didn't cross. So here I am in Frostburg going, is anybody coming my way? Please. And only a couple of times was I able to coordinate something with someone for a carpool. Cause I had about a 9-month stretch one time where I didn't have a car. and I had just started like a new job. And so it was like, well, I'm just here to work. And so,
Yeah.
and even now, like that, I mean, the expense I pay for my car is an important piece of it because I still do a lot of my own drives.
Yeah, that's tough, man. I've had to do some drives for just like Jersey and back, and there's a huge chunk, I guess, of the drive is when you have to go so far away to pick up maybe one person or two people, and then you go from there to the venue, and then from the venue there. But like even like for example, like Pete DeLong, I drop Pete off, and I still have like an hour and 20 minutes home alone at like 4 a.m. trying to like slap myself awake, and it's crazy. It's insane. But honestly, like that's the most fun. Like you throw like a podcast on or some music or just like the conversations. A 3-4 hour drive with a good car full of people and a conversation going like makes it like so much better. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
Who are some people early on that you would drive around with or that was part of your car when you were fortunate enough to find that travel?
I was gonna say, like I said, it was so rare. So like one of the very first people was Bill Bain. He's a wrestler out of Maryland. He's been an extra for the WWE several times. And he works in that Western Pennsylvania, Maryland area. And so I think he might have been like the first person I actually like really carpooled with. There was somebody else in the car at the time too. And now my brain is like, I can't remember his name. But I kind of had the same situation. It would be like, I would be the one driving forever away and then meeting up with somebody
just
4
a
hours
carpool
away to drive an hour. Like,
yep. Yeah, totally. What was the experience like of working those two different stretches? Was there culture differences of the way the business was handled on one side of Pennsylvania and that stretch, and then the other side? Like, because I heard more of that the Virginia area and stuff like that is more like they're more rooted in the old school, like kayfabe, like certain ways, and the other places are kind of looser.
it's mixed. It really is mixed. I would say the biggest difference I had was the first time I went to Canada. And even then it wasn't so tremendously different. It Not really. Like the culture just still felt very much like the culture. What happens in the difference in wrestling that you see isn't necessarily so much the wrestling itself, but the crowd. Because there are certainly pockets of a population where you can go, and as long as you like turn to them, they will boo, cheer, cry, scream, like just a glance, and they'll go crazy. But there's other places that you have to go to that you better be marathon running your match with every imaginable craziness that you can think of, or they're just not even going to care.
They're gonna sit in their hands.
Right. And I do think there's a good place where there's blends of that. Like I love when MCW's in Joppa, Maryland, for example, because you get a little bit of the feed from New Jersey and Philly, but you get a little bit of this sort of old schoolness too. You get a very family-based crowd and they want to be fed. So it's sort of like, okay, that's an interesting hodgepodge of people. And I really like working with that group too.
How did the character of Phil Stamper and then the president of independent wrestling, how did that all come about?
Over time. So I mean, I've used a couple different names, and it's so funny because I just did a seminar for the Catchpoint Academy, which is Drew Gulak and Yuta Wheeler School, and Drew knows me as Nate Stein, the name I used to write under, for a whole bunch of reasons. Like when I first started in wrestling, like you weren't supposed to be writing anything, even just results. So I had a pen name that I was using. That. And all I was doing, I was literally just writing results, and people got mad about me writing results. I'm like, I don't understand. Okay, fine. So I had this other name. But that's how Drew met me. So he keeps calling me Nate, which I find hilarious. Sammy Callahan every now and again will call me Nate. And I'm like, it's too funny to me. Because Nate Stein to me is dead and buried in a desert somewhere. So
you need some Nate Stein shirts.
Right.
Author Nate Stein.
For some reason, I was thinking for a moment, randomly, I do have an office job, and I ended up having to stay a lot later. You messaged me to like remind me of like, hey, are you still good? I was like, yeah. And then literally after I said that, I got a call that I had to run across campus. So I'm still at my office right now.
Yeah.
But next to my desk is a beer stein with the Nate Stein logo on it.
I love it.
So it's the Nate Stein. Yeah. But the president of wrestling sort of came about. I was at a point, this is probably, I'm trying to think how long ago it was now, maybe 6-7 years ago, where I was really just thinking of like my place in wrestling, where I was. I was physically going through a lot of nerve pain and damage, and I was like, something's wrong. I have to do something different. And I had already transitioned to some places where I was more of a mouthpiece than I was an active wrestler. And so it's like, all right, how do I finagle this? And what does this mean? Who am I as a guy, as a person? And so it really was like, I really am running things. Like people sort of would start by saying like, you're a lot of places, like you're really both in front of camera and behind the scenes, and you're like helping people to do things. And I was like, and in my real life job at the time, it was like, we used to call it like I was the mayor of a small town where I'm not necessarily doing all the work, but I was making sure all the work was happening. And so very much wrestling, I was feeling like that too. And it's like, well, what if I really am like the president of wrestling. I really am helping to coordinate things to make them happen. So it was sort of like real life. And then as the nerve pain got worse, I ended up having to get neck surgery. I moved into more mouthpiece roles and more authority figure roles for a while. And I'm still doing that. And so it really then, now you're taking leadership of organizations. So you really are the president. And so the only thing was I went in it with the intention of like authority figure president, like Triple H being a vice president or executive vice president or whatever his official title is. I wanted that. And then what I started to get when I first did it was, let's play Hail to the Chief. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be like a pastiche of the president of the United States. I am the president of wrestling. You don't want that. You want this.
So Limp Bizkit rolling was your
right, there you go.
So when I first met you, was I believe the first time I ever came across of you or just seeing you as a person or got to chat with you was GSW reunion show at True Mill right before, like I'm saying right before the pandemic. Like that show happened, and then a couple maybe weeks later, it's like everything shut down. And in that aspect, I remember talking to you. You're like, I used to wrestle for a while and stuff because it was the first time really meeting you. And I was still so new to the scene. And I was just kind of doing the podcast thing and kind of learning about independent wrestling in general at all. And you just saying like I had some nerve pain. And then you wore like the vest. And you said, well, this is kind of like one of Sammy's old vests or like something like that along those lines. And you were still, I don't know if you were just fresh from your neck, like your neck or your spine or the nerve pain. Yeah. And, you were in a mouthpiece role there, but you were more like the bad, like you were, the beginning of the show, you weren't the bad guy. You were playing a good guy, but by the end of the show, you turned into full heel mode and you were taking over the company and shutting it back down again. And I was like, oh man, that's kind of cool. You play that heel character, kind of reminiscent to how you said earlier of that manager and his team versus everybody else, like reminiscences of that. And then later on, you became more of like the good guy figure of like with High Tension. You're more of the baby face, like in Phil we trust, we love Phil. And you come in, you're like, no, you're a scumbag. You have to go. You're like, you know what I mean? Like you're taking care of business in that aspect.
Only what do you Ethan prefer? Wild and Killian McMurphy. I mean,
yes. What do you prefer when it comes to the character of Phil Stamper?
Ooh, see, well, what's funny now is like Revolver. I'm both an authority figure and I'm part of a faction, and definitely not well liked. And then MCW, I'm their general manager. I'm like face to neutral. Definitely not in the way of like oh shoot, my brain totally lost it. I'm not like a Stone Cold where like I'm an anti-hero, not that kind of neutral. Just more like I'm down the line. I'm here are the rules. I'm sticking to the rules. Whether I'm not trying to be a jerk. But I'll lean more towards being the nice guy at MCW. But and the way I sell it is, well, at Revolver, people just don't like me for whatever reason. They don't like me. At MCW, people get me. So it must be an East Coast thing. It's High Tension. People get me. So everybody loves me at those places. And then when I go to the West, I don't know what happens.
They get maybe the authority figure. We're so conditioned that in professional wrestling, if there's an authority figure, they're probably bad, or they don't have good intentions, or they mess everything up.
Right, it's a trust issue.
Yes, absolutely. Just like most presidents. if you were to pick on the scene someone, if you had to campaign against, listen, maybe one day somebody runs for presidency of independent wrestling and they come up with like, who would be your vice president, or who would be someone you would run with?
Well, kind of
make a solid campaign.
Two notes with that. The first one is, so I am president of wrestling. There is Matt Cardona out there going, he is the president of independent wrestling. If he wants to be the president of independent wrestling, that's fine. I have a trademark for the president of wrestling. I am in charge of all of it.
Yes.
So that's one. Two, who would be the second in command? See, that's a wide scoping, crazy thing. Because like, part of me is like, well, I don't want necessarily to be somebody under a contract, because that means that they belong to that other place.
Yeah.
Ooh, Jake Christ could probably make a good running mate. I feel like he would have a good base of people that would turn some heads and turn some interest. Like, oh, what's he doing with Phil? But he might not trust me as well. So it's a little bit of a mix.
But I mean, you have your campaign spot style that people love, and your Vice has to be kind of on same par, but definitely bring another form of a crowd to you, so you guys combine forces to get more votes. You know what I mean? So I have a possible running mate. I don't think you're gonna like it though, but I think from an entertainment standpoint, it'd be very funny to see you two combined, especially maybe at like a high tension brand. I think a good running mate for you and a good vice president would be the next guest following you on this podcast, and be Big Dust.
That's
Phil
not
Stamper
bad.
And Big Dust.
That
the
is
president
not
and
bad.
Vice president of pro wrestling.
He definitely would get a secretary position. I don't know what of. He'd be the press secretary.
Okay.
I could totally see him run that.
Would he be the only goon to get a job in your cabinet?
More than likely.
Okay.
I mean, I guess Nelson could be always like, he's the ambassador to Canada.
Yeah. I wish I would have prepped that and had like the whole list of different cabinet members that we could have picked. That's another bit for another time. That'd be a lot of fun. So when you were in this scene, kind of going back to when you were active in a wrestler, there's always the videos of you stretching people out, or they're not paying attention, you throw them in a submission. Was that a lot of your style? Were you the stretcher, the shoot worker? Who was Phil as the wrestler?
Well, so it's become its own life now. Like, it's become its own separate weird thing. So when you see that now, it's definitely a little bit more hyped up of a level than where it used to be. Mm-hmm. I think of like a Reckless Youth, or even like today a Zack Sabre Jr., who you think of like, oh wow, they had these great submission stuff, but like if you watch them as a whole being, it's like, oh no, they have this whole technical path, but like that's because they could do a whole match, and then here were the highlights that happened to be these crazy, weird, outstanding submission holds. So hey, if people want to know me now as like the Stu Hart of wrestling, I'm totally down with that. Like, let me get a basement dungeon and let's do it. But when I started in wrestling, it was still very much you have to be a big guy and you have to be over 6 foot tall, and I'm not. And so when I mentioned when
I first made your thumbnail, I had it like how the size it was, and I try to put everybody in the same framing of the thing. And when I first sent you it, you weren't in the same framing. I was like, I'm not doing my boy Phil like that. And I stretched you out more. I gave you more of the frame. You know what I mean? Because you were definitely a little smaller than everybody else. So I didn't want you to do you dirty, and I gave you more frame there.
I appreciate it. but when I first started, like, there was a lot of people over 6 feet tall. And so I wanted to learn aerial moves. I wanted to, I was already friends with Ruckus, and like I was seeing all the crazy things he could do. But I wanted to learn that stuff. And my trainer was like, we'll get to it. We never got to it. Because he didn't know how to do that stuff. So why would I ever get taught? And I really felt like I was like put on a limb, like, well, what's going to make me different than everybody else that he's training right now? And it's like, well, I have a legitimate grappling background. I can do some other things that maybe other people don't know how to do or what to do yet. And so I incorporated more of like a mat-based wrestling techniques and judo stuff into my wrestling, because I felt like I need to do something here. And that's sort of how it started. The legend of Phil Stamper stretching people. When I was working that show down in West Virginia, that was like every other week. The first time I went down, I actually stayed with a friend of mine, Chance Prophet, down that way, and stayed with him for if not, I don't think it was a whole week, but several days. And we just did training, and then we went on, and like the last day was like an event. And before the event, somebody came up to me and was like, "Hey, Phil, I heard that you knew how to how to actually wrestle and shoot. Like, do you want to roll a little bit?" I was like, "Sure, let's roll." And handily tapped him out, and just thought, "Oh, that was fun." Like, hey. And then I had a couple other challenges. Okay, fun. And I tapped them out too. And for about the next 6 months before every show, people kept coming up to me like, "Hey, Phil, do you want to roll?" I was like, "Sure." And I was fortunate that all except maybe like one person I tapped out or choked out. And about 6 months go by, and I finally asked one of them, like, "You always ask me if you want to roll. Like, where did this all come from?" And he's like, "Oh, Chance Prophet told us that you were from the north and you were trained different. And if we messed up with you in the ring, that you would stretch the ever living Lord out of us. So we wanted to actually like test you and see if you could do that."
That seems to be a northern thing. Like if you mess with some people in Jersey, I would say more. I'm not trying to throw shade at the wrestling community. I know guys like Miles get a little offended. Him and Trotsky have some fun banter over mat wrestling and what state's better. But these PA, Delaware, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, like mat wrestling's a big deal up here, and a lot of people who convert over from pro wrestling to from the mat thing, like. You're gonna meet some workers.
and let me just say this really quickly, since you brought up John Trotsky. Trotsky likes to throw all the shade. He would never roll with me. Every time I would try, because like he'd be rolling with somebody else, and I'd come in like, "Oh, let's." He would always like sort of like leave, and I'm like, "What's going on?" And then one day I was like, "I'm putting this to the test," and so I was like, "Okay." Like I tried to get him to roll, he wouldn't roll, and then like I think he was rolling with somebody else, and like it was like a tag match, and everybody's just rolling around the ring, and I tagged it, and he like left the ring, and then I started to make fun of him for it. I was like, "You are so afraid of me now. What did I do?" And he's like, "Well, I know you know how to wrestle, and I know you actually know judo, and by that point I'd done jujitsu too." He's like, "I know you know that stuff. I don't want to get stretched out." I was like, "Okay,"
because jujitsu, I mean, like. You could be a really good mat wrestler, but when you know Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it's been proven time and time again that you do have a little bit more of an advantage because of and it's a lot of it is the rule sets, right? So like in wrestling, you can't do certain things that you could do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but if it's just a straight up like we're trying to not just pin, but maybe look for the submission or the tap or the roll, jiu-jitsu is going to be your better bet in those scenarios. That's where that's the beauty of mixed martial arts, is because it's all those different styles combining to one, and it has been proven time and time again that BJJ is the wrestling's a great base, but if you could put wrestling with the BJJ, you're gonna be a problem for people.
I used to joke with people that by the time I got into wrestling, I had already dealt with the politics of judo, and like I was well too advanced for all the politics of pro wrestling because of judo. Because this is so weird, even more than amateur wrestling. But like judo, because it's an Olympic sport and a martial art, it means something different. And I was like, "What?" And so I would go to tournaments, and I saw shady deals go down at tournaments for judo, like for belt promotions. That one school, well, all the officials came from one school, and so their guys could never lose. And there's certain scoring things that happen in judo, and like basically, if you throw somebody and it's a great throw, it's an automatic point, and you automatically win your match. And I saw somebody from the Navy Academy throw this kid, and other way around. This one school, this guy threw somebody from the Navy Academy in midair without touching the ground. The Navy Academy guy reversed it and pinned the other guy. Well, the official gave the award to the guy from the other school and not the guy from the Navy Academy, who should have won the match, because he started the throw. And it's like, no, in midair, the other guy reversed it. Like the other guy wins the match. And it was just shady stuff. So it was just
as pro wrestling as anything else.
Right.
Yeah. That honestly, so I got out of pro wrestling and became a fan of mixed martial arts, and like kind of put wrestling aside because I was obsessed with like watching jiu-jitsu, and then like I got more into watching mat wrestling and mixed martial arts and UFC. And then UFC got to the point where it's like, well, actually your ranking and your wins and losses don't matter. If you can go and cut a good promo, you get the title shot. And I was like, I might as well just go back to wrestling.
Right.
and then I kind of incorporated both again because I felt wrestling fans accepted pro wrestling, like the MMA side of things, and MMA were like, we don't want anything to do with pro wrestling, that stuff. And I was like, yeah, but you're getting so much of your business and how to promote fights from the other one. Like, you might as well just cross over. They help each other so much. Let's get some questions here in the chat. One of the first ones that popped up, one of our Discord resident old school wrestling fan says Eric Embry feuding with Akbar was a great feud with wrestlers like Gary Young, Cactus Jack, Super Ninja, the Great Muda, Kamala, and Tim Brooks. Check it out on YouTube. So there you go. Got some love there from that feud.
There's like a 27-part YouTube series about that feud.
Well, you struck up some nostalgia there. And then let's see what we got here. Some guest questions for Phil. Who were some of your early influences in your career, and who influences you now?
Well, I mentioned Reckless Youth before. Certainly, he was a huge influence when I wanted to start wrestling. I was a big fan of like that what I kind of think led to the early Ring of Honor style. So like seeing guys like a Low Key and a Reckless Youth and Daniel Bryan and them Brian Danielson, whatever. Sorry, you get so used to one and another. Yeah. And see how all of that culminated into what eventually became like a Ring of Honor. I think really they sort of head charged that. That was the style I really liked and just absolutely loved and adored. But I think over time it keeps changing because there's more people and new people in wrestling. Like today, my favorite wrestler is Zack Sabre Jr. And I say probably a lot of it to do, not only do I like the style, but probably a lot of it is I've never worked with him. And so I've never had to deal with the person that is Zack Sabre Jr. He could be the biggest jerk in the world and I would never know. But therefore I have no biased opinion. I only know him.
I will say from someone who is a tough critic of people in the wrestling business, I will just say Tony Deppen says Zack Sabre Jr. is a sweetheart and a very nice guy. Even though he broke his arm, he said he was one of the nicest people and he wants to run it back.
I'm laughing not because he broke Tony's arm, but because somebody else, when I first said that about him, they were like, well, okay, it was Sammy Callahan. Was like, man, why don't I believe you said that? Because he almost broke my arm.
Yeah. Any other, if there's any other influences before we go to the next one?
Those are probably the biggest ones I can think of right off the top.
Yeah. And then same question from same person, Hunter Dillon. Even though it's not Submission Hold Sunday, I have to ask, what is your favorite submission to apply to somebody?
Ooh.
My Discord's doing some research on you there.
Right. I mean, okay, but I go two ways. Like, there's the one side, I love an octopus. Like, I think octopus hold is really cool. I modified mine, being smaller but stouter than some people. So I do a rolling version that is sort of like a seated version. So we're already like on the ground and staying on the ground when I do it. And I know a couple of variations off of it. So instead of like just grabbing the arm, sometimes I'll grab the opposite leg. So for amateur wrestling people, it becomes like a banana split more than it does an octopus. But it's sort of like a blend of both. So it's uncomfortable. But because of, I would say, a lot of both the judo background, and of course I was a big fan of Taz when he was in ECW. So like even today I grab a Taz mission sometimes when I can, because it's right there. Because it's just different. It's just a little different. You don't see a Taz mission all the time. And so I went for that in competitive judo. And so now like I borrow that in pro wrestling too.
Now there's a infamous, it's a tough one because I like the work that came out of this place, but obviously it ended on a bad note. But and it's one of the most independent wrestling submissions of all. Have you ever learned the special submission move? We'll just, without giving it its first name, the special, we'll just say.
I think that is the worst submission hold in the history of professional wrestling. It doesn't do anything. Now there was a fan day of the person that helped to create the special, and there was this video that went around for a little bit of him putting it onto a person, and the biggest thing he did was he torqued the guy's wrist. But when you watch that hold, like he did literally, like he grabbed him by the side of the hand and like went like that, and I'm like, that will hurt anybody. The inverted special though that Tim Donst does is a legit submission hold, and I really like that one.
That's one of my favorite things about the fact of when I left professional wrestling as a fan and then became a mixed martial arts, judo, and all that stuff fan, and then coming back to pro wrestling. I guess I missed that whole ROH boat and that whole style, and then coming back, I was like, oh, they're actually doing like figure fours and sharpshooters. No one's giving you their legs to put those on. Like, it's just not and then you go and you see submissions now when they incorporate real submission holds into professional wrestling. Like, sometimes it pisses me off when someone has like a full armbar and they're like fighting out of it. They're like, like, no, it's broke. Yeah. You're done. You know what I mean? Like,
I hate a rear chin lock when like the person's elbow is like here. Like, no, like here.
But I do enjoy that more. I think one of my favorite seminars I ever got to just hang out, because I was doing commentary for a show, and I know this guy's in some heat right now and did some I mean, alleged, I don't know what the verdict was, but one of my favorite seminars I got to watch was Davey Richards, because he was teaching everyone legit submissions, because he's no joke in that department. But he was also like, here's how the submission is done in the world of professional wrestling. But here is, if you're ever working with somebody and they decide they're going to get tough with you, just modify it here. And then you got this guy by the ball. And I was just like, it was just so fun of him just kind of like going, well, here's a submission. But if I just do this instead, and the guy's like, ah!
I should clarify about the special. The only person who I've seen who I think has put it on in a way that would probably actually do some damage was Chris Hero.
Yeah.
He's the only person I've seen. Everybody else gets, I think, sort of to your point, they got very lackadaisical about how they did it. And so therefore it wasn't a good looking submission hold. It was like the rear chin lock with the elbow down in the middle of the chest.
If you were to fight any wrestler in the past, present, or future, who would it be and why?
Sami Callihan any day of the week.
I love it.
Sami Callihan, Sammy Johnston and I are good friends. Sami Callihan, I want to see regularly punched in the face. There are too many days where Sammy Johnston is really Sami Callihan, and I can't stand it. And so I have
You're pounding on the desk as you're so fired up.
I have told this to him into his face. Like, I just can't. There are occasional times, like I think, fortunately, I'm somebody who takes a lot to like really like work up and get mad. And it takes me a lot more to stay there. And there's only been like 2 people, I think, in all of wrestling who like I hear their name and I actively get like acid reflux. Like, and not that I would necessarily even fight them, but just like I would be very mad with them enough to fight them. But there's plenty of people out there like, do what?
One of those names is Sammy.
Sammy doesn't make me like have active bile though.
Okay.
I'm frustrated with him sometimes. But there are people who are like, I would love to have a fight with, because I think it would be have you remember like early APA days when it was like they weren't the APA yet, but they would just start fighting each other a little bit and then they would have a beer together? Like, those are some of the fights I want to have. Like, the Carver of Cutter's Alley and I did have a street fight, which no one will ever see because the promoter will never put out the footage. But it was an awesome fight. He beat my ass for 12 minutes and it was great. I would fight him again in a heartbeat. I have a friend in Arkansas named Wesley Crane. He wrestles sort of like at the Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas area. He's a great guy. We have been actively talking about how we can put together a fight somehow. Eric Cannon, and I have been friends forever. And though we've been on the same shows together, we've never really like interacted. And so I would love to do something with him. But I think by the time we're going to do it, we're both going to have walkers.
Yeah. It still counts. Sting's going to be in Wembley. So
there you go.
Which I was like, oh my God, are they going to give the Nick Wayne a shot in Wembley with Darby? And I was like, nope. Sting, get in there. I respect Sting for what he's done, but give the young kid a shot. So speaking of names like your Nick Waynes of the world, you are very in touch, really in tune with what's going on in the world of independent wrestling and just wrestling in whole. Who are some names right now that you've been watching or going to shows and seeing? Just because here's the thing with you as well, is you don't also just judge their in-ring, but their character outside of the ring. And I think that's what I try to do as well. Like if you see someone on my podcast or someone I'm taking a picture with or someone who I'm really involved in, it's not just because I'm not just marking out because of their in-ring ability. They're good people as well.
Mm-hmm.
So who are some people that more locker rooms should be bringing these names in, not just for their in-ring, but what they bring to the table and their work ethic and what they're putting out there?
And you know, we're in a very weird swing in pro wrestling, and it's sort of like this. It's like a double swing. What's happening right now? There's so much wrestling content out there that is viewable. WWE, AEW, Impact, New Japan, so readily accessible. MLW, Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, are probably and NWA are probably the biggest names right now in the United States when it comes to companies, and how they're getting stuff out there, and they have televised programming, or very active YouTube television programs. And so having a tier that's already there, but then you have this gigantic tier of people who are ready for television who aren't getting called up yet. And because of the pandemic, then you got a backlog of people who never like matured into the systems because there wasn't a lot of movement at that time. So it's like you have this weird captures here and even a little lower, and then a new tier of people coming up. Like, I put this out. I said this yesterday on my social media. Like, rookie of the year, Junie Underwood all day.
Totally agree.
And when I say this next, it's funny because I didn't think of his name, but I was thinking he was around longer, so he might qualify for rookie, but he might also qualify for most improved. Ricky Price is another guy from the Northeast right now.
You know what's crazy? It's not. Well, this is gonna air later, so people aren't gonna know about it. But we're calling it now. That's a match I've been wanting to see happen for quite some time.
Okay.
It may happen on Sunday at the Sanctuary.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah, that's because I think stylistically, I think they're gonna put magic together, and I became really close with Ricky, and I'm becoming close with Junie, and I was just like, and they're kind of like they wear over each other and they want to work each other, and I'm like, well, here's the place to do it if you could both make the drive. And I think we're putting together Sunday. I hope it happens. I hope if it doesn't happen, I'm sorry, but I totally agree. I think there are two names that are just unbelievable, and they're both in that same thing where they started, then the pandemic, and they had to stop, and then they started again. So totally agree with everything you're saying.
But there are people like Brent Oakley, who's out in Ohio. There's Gia Scott, who's out of Baltimore. There are I smirk, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to put this on him yet. Aaron Wade from Tennessee, and yes, there's Jaden Newman too out of Tennessee who helped to train him, who are already on the rise and already on a lot of people's radars. But I'm like keeping attention out because I'm like, I think something more is going to happen with Aaron, and I don't think he knows it yet. And I even look at refs. Like I look at Gina, and I look at Shiny Shoes, Aaron, like who are and Ref Shark, who are just amazing refs. And Shark is also a wrestler. Like there's just such amazing talent out there. Kurt Robinson, who was in the Philly area, left the Philly area, went down to North Carolina because he was in high school. Now has gone through college and is now back training again. And so like I'm waiting to see him like make his way out there again. There's people like Miami Mike and Miles Hawkins, and there's just so much talent that's out there right now that I'm just waiting for. Like there's going to be something that's going to happen that's going to be special, but I don't know what that special is yet. And I don't know if it's because something else will come, or if there's going to be an implosion somewhere else and it's going to make a whole bunch of room for these people and then they're going to go up. Because like you're seeing like a Billy Starks is on so many radars right now, and where she's at, like she's probably one of the best paid independent wrestlers in the world right now.
She wasn't even done high school yet, and she had 90% of the women's and men's divisions of independent wrestling. Like, yo, can you fly her across the country so I could work her? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's insane.
Like I know I'm gonna get the age wrong because like. Not that I'm putting this person over, but you know, Teddy Hart used to say his claim to fame was like he was the youngest person ever to get a WWE contract. Not that he'd ever did anything with it, but Ken Doane was, I think, one day shy of his 18th birthday and was wrestling on Raw. Who is Kenny Dykstra, Spirit Squad Kenny. And I mean, if you think about it, he's still in his like early 30s. And like now he's an agent for the WWE and runs a training school up in New England. Bobby Orlando, like why isn't he on more events right now? JT Dunn is probably the best unsigned wrestler in the world right now.
Yeah.
And then you have people who are signed, who are able to do other shows. Like it was so funny because everything in my brain was like, say Speedball Mike Bailey, and it's like, but he's under contract, Phil. Like he's already that guy. Like he's already there. Ace Austin is already there. Trey Miguel is already there. Like, but they're also three people who keep growing and getting better. They're not like, I'm here and now I'm just gonna play it out. Like they keep doing new things.
I was at Speedball's show. He ran the fightertainment at Tony Deppin's brewery, and Speedball's the kind of guy that like he's contracted, right? I don't want to say he's made it because there's still way more that he could be doing with his talent, but he puts so much hard work into this industry and this business, and not only is he like made a name for himself, but he is using his name and his platform to then put on other shows to give the Junie Underworlds and the Athens and the Lost Boys and Mookie and all of these people these opportunities to go out and work with him and travel with him and get them that opportunities to get better. And it's just like Speedball, man, he's an A+ in my book just for his character.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
So we said a lot of those upcoming names. Now there was a time in independent wrestling. I know I'm sure you were there the same day I was, IWTV 100, where two gentlemen went out there and just showed all of us in that building that they are the future of professional wrestling. And that was Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia. Is there anyone that's at that level on the indie scene who hasn't been picked up? There's only one name from right. Well, two names. I would say Marcus and Jordan Oliver, because Wayne's already kind of up there that I think are really good, like going to be names that we're going to be talking about in the next 5 to 10 years.
I so much want the world for Matt Mikowski.
Wow, what a name! That's a great pick. Great pick.
Like I mean, he just went through he's at a good place, but he went through a bad time with his knee recovery when he came back from his ACL surgery, and that took a long time for him to get over. And also coming out of the pandemic, but he is such an outstanding talent in the ring and such a top-notch person that like on both levels, he's very, in my brain, he's a lot like that Speedball Mike Bailey mentality. Like,
yes,
he's that guy that I would love to see at more places.
Here's a name for you. Darius Carter.
That is very true. I mean, talent-wise, he's there. Attitude-wise, he's there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you have more access than most. How you're dropping names from Tennessee and all over. I mean, I'm kind of locked into the Northeast area, and then like GCW when they went over to LA showed me a whole nother side of independent talent. They're like, wow, look at like you got the Kid Bandits, the like names like that out there that are just killing it. And it's just like there's so much. Like how we talked about that wrestling iceberg. Like what we see on TV is just this, and then underneath it is that feeder independent program. And I want my platform to be a spot where people can learn about those new names and just hear us talking about these names so you can go follow them. One last thing I want to say before we get towards like if there's any other questions I could read for you in the Discord, but you put a lot of work every month, and I implore everyone to go follow Phil on all social media. His links will be below, but you put a spreadsheet out every month of every promotion that you can come up with, and you encourage people to message you with their promotions. So you literally put so much time and effort into this. How did that come about? And I don't even want to ask why, because after this conversation, we know why you're doing it. But how did that come about, and what is the overall goal for that?
So it's weird because it sort of has had two different lives. When I first did it, I was actually I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, and I was only doing Pennsylvania promotions. That's sort of how it started. And at that point, I was even doing information about the upcoming event and like the card that had been announced. And that got to be a lot. And I started to expand to other, any other promotions I could find at that point. And it was just a lot. I sort of burned myself out because it was just so much. And there was somebody else in wrestling at the time. His name was DT Cutting, who was doing the list a little bit more like how I do it now. Like it's sort of like the one line at a time. Here's all these promotions. And then DT sort of vanished. I don't know what happened. If he's still around, I hope he is, and that he's in good health. But I haven't heard from him in a long time. I won't say who, but somebody in my wrestling life. I had started to work for CZW, and when I was there, I was doing all of their press and social media, and somebody who was there or around, I guess because they really weren't there at that point, they were just around, was like, there's no wrestling anymore. There's no wrestling happening on the weekends. Nobody's doing anything. I was like,
crazy.
What are you talking about? Like I see all the time, like just on my friends' Facebook pages, I could see all the stuff that was going on. So that's how it started. Was I just started looking at my friends' Facebook pages and just putting together like this little list of stuff. And I used to keep it in a notebook document or notepad on my computer, because whenever I would replace it from the top, so like when the dates passed, I'd put it at the bottom, and I would cycle. I would like go back through the list of those events if they weren't repeating that I knew of them, and then start to plug them back in again to try to keep this regular rotation. And then it advanced to a point where somebody was interested in standing up an event webpage. And the person, they were like a coder. They knew how to build a web page. I do not have I don't have the architecture set to do what they were doing. And so I started to use his platform. Well, then his platform, the coding broke, but it helped me to see how to lay it out and to do a different kind of spreadsheet. So now I use a Google Doc or Google Sheet to track all of these independent events. And then I have a separate Google Doc that I'm tracking also promotions and their contact information and their social media. Awesome. And so that's been helping. I'm also tracking. I have fallen off this. I do this wax and wane on this. I track some independent wrestling seminars, and or just wrestling seminars. I guess I shouldn't say independent. When you have Gabe Sapolsky, who's an agent for the WWE, doing seminars, that's not an indie seminar. That's just a seminar. So I'm sort of tracking all three of those right now.
And there's a whole nother category that could be added to that. That's one of the things I'm trying to figure out, just to put people in the right direction, is obviously if you can't make it to a show, the world of production of independent wrestling has picked up, whether it's on their YouTube pages or some promotions now are doing a Patreon where you get to see their matches through Patreon, which I think is a good idea. And it's not bad to throw $5 and get the support that way. Twitch channels are putting wrestling out there. IWTV, which is probably one of the biggest, and now Fight TV, who have, I mean, that Fight TV promotion is great because not only with the $5 a month, you get GCW's entire library. And I mean, just for Mania weekend alone, the $5 or whatever it is for the year is going to pay you just enough for the wrestling weekend for GCW. And then you get everything else. I know there's a lot of promotions on there who are kind of on the Fight TV side of things. There's another one, I don't know what it's called, but it's Premier Fight Network or Premier Network
streaming network. Yep.
Yeah. And so there's so much out there that if you're looking to say, like, you want to support a promotion or you want to go search out a wrestler, even though you can't, maybe they wrestle in a different state, there's ways you can go and support these other wrestling promotions also.
Absolutely. There's so much out there. And I it's weird because during the pandemic, I was like trolling those pages, and I would always plug like where you could watch it on Fight or on IWTV. I even made a Facebook page that's called Wrestling on Facebook Live, because I wanted another outlet for people not only to promote, but also then because people were sharing things on YouTube and Facebook Live, like, here's where you can put it, like give people like sort of a little bit of a free channel. And then now it's become more on the promotion side, because now people have reverted away from doing like free stuff on YouTube and Facebook as much. They're still out there, but it's just not as much. And now a lot of them are doing that streaming. So I do try to capture on the calendar now, like on IWTV, on Fight TV, on whatever the streaming platform is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question I have for you is I forgot it last episode, and I'm very, very, very sorry to Hunter. Logos by Hunter, who has been, I have over 100 pieces of merchandise on my online pages because Hunter has just been killing it when it comes to logos boosts and trying to just help me with this car and getting some money and raising some fun just to get my life back on track. So I thank him so much. If you're anyone out there looking for logos or looking for a way to get that, as well as intro music, I have Hunter and like the Converse Kid, as well as a bunch of other artists I work for. I know in the future I want to start spreading out, and because I was just talking to Crusher who's an artist, and I was like, oh, I would like a ABJ Podcast Crusher inspired logo. It'd be kind of cool to give everybody a shot at a logo and then promote them and give them some work once I start making some money. But his question is, if you can write a letter to a younger self, what would that letter say?
Oh my God.
It's a deep question.
It is. Here's where my brain went first really quick. I am a ridiculous Doctor Who and Star Trek nerd. So like I went into the whole time paradox of what are the things I would tell myself, but that I could be able to avoid if I told myself without creating a horrible time paradox.
Would it be stay away from Sammy? No.
I don't see. Sammy's one of those, like, it's kind of a fixed point in time. Like you have to deal with Sammy Kelly. But I don't know. Like there are some things like it's so funny because even now, like for context, I have 3 college degrees. I work in higher education. I like, and there are times I trip over my words because I'm an idiot. And so like there are those moments where it's like, not that I think I've ever like rushed to say something before I've thought it through, but at the same time, like, hey, with this person, just give a minute, or just avoid them completely because it's going to be disastrous. Like a couple of those feel like they would come to mind. But you know, in general, there would be a lot of stick with it, or try a little harder. Like don't give up. It's going to work out. And I mean, even very recently, back in early June, those first 2 weekends, I had 7 bookings in 2 weeks. Had the Thursday before that first weekend, in 24 hours, 3 of them canceled. And by the end of it, only 1 event didn't cancel out of those 7. The other 6 did. And I was very down on myself. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. What have I done wrong? I'm not hearing back from places. Or I've heard back, but I've heard these really weird cryptic things, or I've heard downright. I started to tell people, like, I've had some fun lies lately told to me. Like, here are my list of lies that people were telling me. And it's like, I don't understand it. Like, why? And I reached out to somebody who I trust and respect and be like, I just need an opinion. Can you tell me your opinion? And they got heated because they thought I was trying to out a friend of theirs. I was like, no, that's not what I'm doing. I need advice and an opinion. And like, because I'm trying to figure out, I'm still working and I'm still doing stuff and I'm still in multiple promotions, but why am I not doing more? And I've tried not every trick. Trick feels like, you know, you're trying to play a trick on somebody, but like I've tried everything in my playbook to like reach out to people, or I've tried every loop of like, hey, I'm going out this direction. I'm going to be out that way. I would like to be there. Hey, I have family in this area. I even had a promoter who I reached out to them and we started to talk and they were like, oh, you're mutual friends with this person. I'm like, yeah, that's my cousin. And they were like, oh, I'm like best friends with her. We went to high school together and I couldn't get booked from I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Who then trolls me on Revolver content and like make like not bad comments, but just sort of comments and like super complimentary. I'm like, well, why won't you use me? I don't understand. But I was just really, really down on myself. And you know, I think a little bit of encouragement of like those moments are going to happen, but then you're going to have what I'm about to walk into starting next weekend, which is from the end of August through Thanksgiving. I'm booked every single weekend. Not completely though. There's more days available in those weeks and weekends. But at least one event every single weekend. And so it's going to happen and it's going to come and it's going to be a fight, and you're not going to always get the gold medal at the end. And sometimes it is a little about the relationships that you make, and that it has to be its own reward to you at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to kind of double back on what I said at the start of this, man. When I first got into this, I'm so thankful of where and how and who I've been around so early in this journey. Because I was always a fan and I never expected to be in or considered a part of the business. And still part of me doesn't always think I am a member of the team. You know what I mean? I'm kind of always thought of myself as like, I'm the podcaster who kind of comes in every now and then. Like I showed up at Leapfrog and I walked in and I was just like, I have a trunk full of equipment that like I think would make the show look and sound better. And then like that was kind of my in. And people like you and especially you, man, are like, when I hear about you, when I looked into you and I like how you conduct yourself, or how you're willing to make those drives by yourself to go places where it's a locker room full of people that you may or may not know, but you're leaving with more connections and more friends and more outreach. And you still use all of your hard work and dedication to then put over other people, or try to make sure that their hard work gets seen. And like, you're a huge inspiration of why I do what I do. And I kind of reformatted how I do the ABJ podcast, because sure, I want my brand to grow and I want to be a content creator for a job and a living, but everything that I'm doing is to shed light on people who I feel deserve it. And I gotta say, man, like, Phil, you're a huge reason why I do what I do, and I respect the shit out of you.
I appreciate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if people aren't using you, they're fools. They're fools because you work so goddamn hard to and your love and passion for this business it's contagious. Like, and it's you're a joy to be around, and I want to just personally from my end just say thank you for all you've done for this industry.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Where can people find you on social media, or to support you and to throw some gas money to you, because you're driving all over the place?
So I not so subtly put my social media handle in my name tag. So I'm almost on every single social media platform at Trust in Phil. My Cash App is Trust in Phil. My PayPal might actually be PS Phenom still, but everything is pretty much, all of my social media is Trust in Phil. So I'm on Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube.
Do you have merch pages?
So unfortunately, the company I was using decided that they no longer wanted to fulfill people's requests without giving them their money back. So I had to close my store down. So I'm actually looking for a new vendor right now to have a storefront.
Or you can just make your own at TeePublic or Teespring.
I mean, that's probably honestly where I'm going to end up, is on Teespring.
Yeah, I need the presidential seal t-shirt, man.
There you go. I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah, so that's sort of the next thing, is like, I just need to sit down and do that. I think I mentioned before, I work in higher education, and our semester starts Monday. So I've been sort of buried under that.
Yeah. Well, once again, I want to thank you so much. Everybody, next week on the podcast will be the one and only future vice president of professional wrestling. Big Dust will be on the podcast. Hopefully I can have Killian on soon too. You know what I mean? I work through the goons, you know, get him, then Miles, and then you have to go goon adjacent of like former goon, or maybe just hung out with the goon or ate breakfast with them. There's a lot that stable has a reach, you know.
I tease a lot, but I love those guys. I love Killian and Dust and working with them. And we had the opportunity to work on a couple of projects during the more like the back half of the more lockdown area of the pandemic.
Oh, where Killian Vision, you guys, you were like the antagonist to their thing. Yeah, it was beautiful. It was one of my favorite pieces of wrestling that I've ever got to film.
Oh, awesome! That's cool. That's so cool. I did part of Killian's big damn cinematic too. Yeah, that was before Killian Vision. I did a Tim Donst versus Dr. Cube, and Killian and Dust were two of the goons of Dr. Cube. So it just was amazing.
One of my favorite on-screen things with you and Killian is the first Creep Frog for Can't Believe Frog. And you're telling a story, and Killian goes, blah, 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 real spooky, Phil. That's a stupid story. just amazing. Every time that you guys get to collaborate together and work, it's always funny, and that rivalry between you and the goons. But I would say, like, they're another one too. I say it every time I can give them those roses, is they're showing that if you get a group of people and show you true love and support for one another in this business and make the roads and fill up a car full of people, you can work together to get ahead and put together great wrestling content and help each other in this business. And the goons are a great example for that. But yeah, Dust will be on next week, so definitely tune into that one. And here's some outro music by the Converse Kid, and we'll see you guys next week on the ABJ Podcast.